The weaver's fingers trembled as she held the cream-colored wool thread up to the fading afternoon light streaming through her shop window, squinting hard to see if she had chosen the right shade for Mrs. Patterson's table runner. Grace Garrison blinked several times, but the blur refused to clear, and a familiar ache settled behind her eyes like an unwelcome visitor who had overstayed their welcome. She was only 24 years old, yet her vision had been failing for the past year, ever since that fever had swept through Aspen, Colorado in the winter of 1883, leaving her alive but stealing her sight bit by bit with each passing month. The small weaving shop on the corner of Mill Street had been her mother's before consumption had taken her 3 years ago, and Grace had inherited both the business and the responsibility of keeping herself fed and housed in a town that did not look kindly on women who could not pull their weight. Her father had died in a mining accident when she was 16, leaving her mother to raise her alone, teaching her the ancient art of weaving that had been passed down through generations of women in their family. Now Grace was the last of the Garrisons in Aspen, and her failing eyes threatened to take away the only livelihood she had ever known. She set down the thread with a frustrated sigh and rubbed her temples, feeling the headache that always came after hours of straining to see her work. The loom in the corner stood like a silent judge, half-finished blankets and rugs waiting for her to complete them. But each day it became harder to distinguish one color from another, harder to see if her weaving was even or if she had made mistakes that would embarrass her when customers came to collect their orders. The bell above her shop door chimed, and Grace quickly straightened, blinking away the moisture that had gathered in her eyes. She could make out the tall silhouette of a man backlit by the late afternoon sun, broad-shouldered and wearing what appeared to be a wide-brimmed hat typical of the cattlemen who passed through town. "Good afternoon," she said, forcing cheer into her voice despite the exhaustion that weighed on her like a lead blanket. "How can I help you today?" The man stepped further into the shop, and Grace squinted to make out his features. He was young, perhaps close to her own age, with dark hair that needed trimming and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who spent more time outdoors than in. "Afternoon, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal kind eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her small shop. "Name's Ryder Thompson. I'm working at the Double R Ranch just outside town, and I heard tell you make the finest woven goods in this part of Colorado." Grace felt her cheeks warm at the compliment, though she wondered if it was still true given the mistakes she had been making lately. "That's very kind of you to say, Mr. Thompson. Are you looking for something in particular?" Ryder walked slowly along the shelves where Grace displayed her finished pieces, running his hand along a thick wool blanket in shades of brown and cream. "This is beautiful work," he said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "How long does it take you to make something like this?" "About a week if I work on it steadily," Grace said, moving closer but keeping the counter between them. She had learned to be cautious around men she did not know, even ones who seemed respectful. "That one's already spoken for, I'm afraid. Mrs. Henderson ordered it for her daughter's wedding gift." "What about this rug?" Ryder asked, pointing to a large piece hanging on the wall that displayed an intricate geometric pattern in blues and grays. Grace's heart sank. That was one of the pieces she had completed last month, before her vision had worsened considerably, and she could still remember how proud she had been of the precise lines and perfect symmetry. "That's available," she said quietly. "I'm asking $12 for it." "I'll take it," Ryder said without hesitation. Grace blinked in surprise. $12 was a significant sum, more than most cowboys earned in 2 weeks of hard work. "Are you certain? That's quite a price." "It's worth every penny," Ryder said, pulling a worn leather wallet from his coat pocket. "My bunkhouse is bare as a bones, and this would brighten it up considerably. Besides, a man likes to have something beautiful to look at after a long day working cattle." As Grace wrapped the rug in brown paper and tied it with string, her hands shaking slightly from both exhaustion and nerves, she found herself stealing glances at her customer. Ryder Thompson had an open, honest face, and there was something gentle in the way he watched her work, as if he could see past the careful mask she wore to hide her struggles. "Thank you for your business, Mr. Thompson," she said as she handed over the wrapped rug, accepting the bills he counted out onto her counter. "Call me Ryder," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. "And I have a feeling I'll be back soon. A man can always use good quality woven goods." After he left, Grace sank onto the stool behind her counter and allowed herself a moment of relief. $12 would pay her rent for the month and buy supplies besides. She did not have to worry, at least for a little while longer. But that night, as she sat at her loom in the small room behind her shop that served as both workspace and home, she had to admit defeat after only an hour. The threads blurred together no matter how many times she blinked, and she had already pulled out the same row 3 times after realizing she had used the wrong color. The lamp beside her, which usually provided adequate light for evening work, now seemed dim and useless, though she had just filled it with fresh oil that morning. Grace put her head in her hands and let the tears come, silent sobs that shook her shoulders as she faced the truth she had been avoiding for months. She was going blind, slowly but surely, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The doctor in town had examined her and told her it was a consequence of the fever, that the illness had damaged the nerves in her eyes, and that he knew of no treatment that could reverse the damage. He had suggested she find a husband to take care of her, as if marriage were a cure for failing vision, as if any man would want a wife who would eventually become a burden. The next morning, Grace opened her shop as usual, though her eyes felt gritty and swollen from crying. She had 3 orders to complete, all promised by the end of the week, and she forced herself to sit at the loom despite the pain that immediately began throbbing behind her eyes. She worked slowly, holding threads up to the window light repeatedly to ensure she had selected the correct colors, and by noon she had completed barely a quarter of what she normally would have finished in that time. The bell chimed again, and Grace looked up to see Ryder Thompson entering her shop once more, this time carrying his hat in his hands like a man approaching something precious. "Good morning, Miss Garrison," he said, and she realized she had never told him her name. He must have asked around town about her. "Good morning, Ryder," she replied, using his given name since he had invited her to do so. "Has something gone wrong with your rug?" "Not at all," he assured her quickly. "It looks perfect hanging in my room. I came because I found myself in need of a table runner, and I recalled seeing several here yesterday." Grace gestured to the shelf where she kept smaller, finished pieces. Her hands tightened in her lap as Ryder browsed, praying he would not notice the slight irregularities in the newer pieces, the places where her stitching had gone astray without her realizing, until it was too late to fix without unraveling hours of work. "This one," Ryder said, selecting a runner in earth tones that Grace had completed 2 weeks ago. "How much?" $3, Grace said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Fair price," Ryder replied, once again counting out bills without argument. He returned the next day for a set of dishcloths. The day after that, he purchased 2 small decorative wall hangings. By the end of the week, Ryder had bought 7 items from her shop, spending more money than any single customer had ever spent in such a short time. On the 8th day, As Grace was wrapping yet another purchase for him, she finally found the courage to speak the question that had been burning in her mind. "Ryder, why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, not meeting his eyes. "You cannot possibly need all these things." A single man living in a bunkhouse has no use for 3 table runners and matching napkins. She heard him set down the package and take a breath. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but serious. "May I be honest with you, Grace?" The use of her first name should have felt too familiar, but instead it sent a warmth through her chest that she had not felt in longer than she could remember. She nodded, still not looking up. "I've noticed that you're struggling," Ryder said carefully. "I've watched you hold threads up to the light a dozen times before selecting one. I've seen you squint at your work and rub your eyes as if they pain you. And I've heard talk in town about how the fever last year left you with vision problems." Grace felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and tears stung her already aching eyes. "I see," she managed to say through a tight throat. "So this is pity then, charity for the poor blind weaver." "No," Ryder said firmly, and suddenly his hand was covering hers where it rested on the counter, warm and calloused and surprisingly gentle. "It's not pity, Grace. I buy your pieces because they're beautiful and because you deserve to rest. I've watched you work yourself to exhaustion trying to keep up with orders that would strain someone with perfect vision. I thought if I could buy enough of your existing inventory, maybe you could take time to care for yourself without worrying about money." Grace did look up then, blinking through tears to try to make out his face. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because you remind me of my mother," Ryder said softly. "She was a seamstress back in Missouri, worked herself nearly to death trying to keep me and my sisters fed after my father was killed in the war. I was too young to help her then, but I'm not too young anymore. And maybe you're not my mother, but you're someone who needs help, and I have the means to give it." "I cannot accept charity," Grace whispered, even as part of her desperately wanted to accept this unexpected kindness. "It's not charity if I'm buying goods that I can use or give as gifts," Ryder countered. "And it's not charity if it makes me happy to do it. Please, Grace, let me help you." She pulled her hand away from his, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could physically hold herself together. "What happens when you run out of money or lose interest in this project? I'll still be going blind, and I'll still need to support myself. Then we'll figure something else out," Ryder said with such confidence that Grace almost believed him. "But for now, let me buy your inventory so you can rest those eyes. The doc in town might be useless, but there's a physician in Denver who's supposed to be one of the best in the territory. Maybe with some rest and proper examination, he could help you." Grace wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her pride and independence, but the truth was she was terrified and exhausted and so very tired of being brave all alone. "All right," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I keep track of everything you spend, and someday, when I'm able, I'll find a way to repay you." Ryder smiled, and even through her blurred vision, Grace could see the warmth in it. "Deal. Now, how about you show me what else you have in stock?" Over the next 2 weeks, Ryder Thompson systematically purchased nearly everything Grace had completed and ready for sale in her shop. He bought blankets and rugs, table linens and decorative pieces, even a set of curtains that Grace had woven years ago and could never quite sell. He carefully packed each item and hauled them away, though Grace suspected he had nowhere near enough space in his bunkhouse for all of it. True to his word, once most of her inventory was gone, Ryder insisted on paying Grace a weekly sum in exchange for right of first refusal on any new pieces she made. "That way you can work at your own pace," he explained. "No pressure to fill orders or meet deadlines. Just create what you can when you can, and I'll buy whatever you make." Grace protested that this was too much, that he was spending his entire wages on her. But Ryder just shrugged and said he had been saving his pay for years with nothing to spend it on, and this made him happier than letting it sit in a bank. With the immediate financial pressure relieved, Grace did something she had not done in over a year. She closed her shop for 3 days and simply rested. She kept the curtains drawn to protect her sensitive eyes from the bright sunlight, applied cool compresses that the doctor had once suggested, and slept more than she had in months. When she finally emerged, the pain behind her eyes had lessened, though her vision remained as blurry as before. Ryder came by every few days, sometimes to check on her welfare, sometimes just to talk. He told her stories about life on the ranch, about the ornery cattle and the beautiful mountain views from the high pastures. He made her laugh with tales of his fellow ranch hands and their various mishaps, and he listened with genuine interest when she talked about weaving, about the patterns she had learned from her mother and grandmother, about the meditative quality of working the loom when her eyes did not betray her. One evening in early October, as the aspens on the mountainsides turned brilliant gold and the air carried the first hints of coming winter, Ryder brought Grace a basket of fresh apples from the ranch orchard and an invitation. "There's a harvest dance this Saturday at the community hall," he said, seeming almost nervous as he spoke. "I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you." Grace's heart leaped at the invitation, but doubt immediately followed. "Ryder, I cannot dance properly. I would not be able to see where I was going. I would trip over my own feet and embarrass us both." "Then we'll stand at the edge and talk," Ryder said simply. "Or we'll dance slow enough that tripping is impossible. Or we'll skip the dancing entirely and just enjoy the food and music." "I don't care what we do, Grace. I just want to spend the evening with you." She studied his face, or at least the blurred shape that she had come to recognize as him, and something warm and frightening unfurled in her chest. "Why?" she asked, needing to understand. "Why do you want to spend time with a woman who's going blind? I have nothing to offer you, Ryder. I cannot even properly see your face anymore." "You have everything to offer," Ryder said softly, and she felt his hand touch her cheek with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "You're brave and talented and kind. You're stubborn as a mule about accepting help, which drives me crazy but also makes me admire you more. And you have the most beautiful smile I've ever seen, on the rare occasions when you let yourself truly smile." "You're a fool," Grace whispered, but there was no heat in it. "Probably," Ryder agreed. "But I'm a fool who would very much like to take you to the harvest dance. Will you come with me?" Grace knew she should say no. She should protect both of them from the inevitable heartbreak that would come when her vision failed completely, when she became truly helpless and dependent. But the lonely part of her, the part that had been carrying her burdens alone for so long, desperately wanted to say yes. "Yes," she finally said. "I'll go with you." Ryder's answering smile was bright enough that even Grace could see it clearly, and for a moment her failing vision did not seem like the end of the world. The night of the harvest dance, Grace wore her best dress, a deep green calico that her mother had made for her before she died. She had not worn it in years, and it felt strange to dress for something other than work. She attempted to arrange her honey-colored hair in an elegant style, but without being able to see clearly in the mirror, she finally gave up and simply pulled it back in a simple braid woven with a green ribbon. When Ryder arrived to collect her, dressed in clean clothes with his hair neatly combed and smelling faintly of soap and leather, he told her she looked beautiful in a voice that left no doubt he meant it sincerely. He offered her his arm, and Grace took it, grateful for the support as they made their way down the dark street toward the community hall. The building was bright with lantern light, and music spilled out into the cool evening air, fiddles, and a piano playing a lively tune. Grace tensed as they approached, suddenly overwhelmed by the thought of navigating a crowded room where she could barely distinguish faces from shadows. "We can leave whenever you want," Ryder murmured near her ear, as if sensing her anxiety. "Just say the word." But once inside, Ryder proved to be the perfect escort. He guided her to a chair near the refreshment table, describing who was present and what was happening in enough detail that Grace could picture the scene. He brought her cider and cake, and when someone asked her to dance, Ryder politely but firmly declined on her behalf, explaining that she had promised all her dances to him. "I haven't promised you any dances," Grace said with amusement after the third such deflection. "Then promise me one," Ryder said, standing and offering his hand. "One slow dance where I can keep you from stumbling, and you can decide if you want to murder me for putting you through this." Grace let him lead her to the edge of the dancing area, where fewer couples twirled and spun. When Ryder took her in his arms, one hand at her waist and the other holding hers gently, Grace felt something inside her settle, as if she had found a place she belonged after wandering lost for years. They moved slowly to the music, barely more than swaying in place, and Ryder guided her with patience and care. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in his scent and feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. For the first time since her vision had begun to fail, she did not feel broken or incomplete. She simply felt like a woman dancing with a man who made her heart race. "Grace," Ryder said softly as the song ended and another began, and they continued their gentle swaying. "I need you to know something." "What's that?" she asked, not lifting her head from his shoulder. "I don't care if you go completely blind tomorrow," he said, his voice fierce with conviction. "I don't care if you never weave another piece as long as you live. I care about you, Grace Garrison. Not your eyes or your talent or your ability to support yourself. You, the woman who tells terrible jokes when she's nervous. The woman who hums while she works. The woman who pretends to be made of iron but cries over baby birds that fall from their nests. That's who I care about." Grace pulled back enough to try to see his face, wishing desperately that she could make out the expression in his eyes. "Ryder, you barely know me." "I know enough," he said, "and I want to know more. I want to know everything. What your favorite flower is, and what makes you laugh until your sides hurt, and what you dream about when you let yourself dream. I want to court you properly, Grace. If you'll let me." She should say no. She should protect him from the burden she would become. But standing in his arms, feeling safer and more cherished than she had in years, Grace found she could not deny them both this chance at happiness, however long it might last. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll let you court me." Ryder pulled her close again, and they danced until Grace's feet ached and her head spun with a joy she had almost forgotten existed. In the weeks that followed, Ryder courted Grace with a determination and sweetness that made her fall harder for him with each passing day. He came by her shop every morning before heading to the ranch, bringing her fresh bread or flowers or once, memorably, a kitten he had found abandoned in the barn. "You need a companion for the long hours," he explained as the tiny orange tabby mewed piteously in his hands. "And cats are good at catching mice. Practical and comforting." Grace named the kitten Marigold and pretended not to notice how quickly she became attached to the little creature who purred against her chest while she worked at her loom. Ryder also took her on walks through town and along the creek that ran behind her shop, describing the changing autumn colors with such vivid detail that Grace could almost see them. He read to her in the evenings, choosing adventure stories and poetry, his deep voice bringing the words to life in the lamplight. And he helped her around the shop, organizing supplies and keeping track of materials without making her feel diminished or incapable. Most importantly, he never treated her as if she were made of glass. When she grew frustrated with her failing vision and snapped at him, he gave it right back, telling her she was allowed to be angry at her situation, but not to take it out on people who cared about her. When she insisted on walking without assistance and promptly tripped over a raised floorboard, he helped her up, checked that she was not injured, and then respected her stubborn independence while staying close enough to catch her if she fell again. By the time the first snow fell in late November, Grace had accepted what her heart had known for weeks. She was completely, irrevocably in love with Ryder Thompson. The realization terrified her almost as much as it elated her. Love meant vulnerability, meant giving someone the power to hurt you, meant trusting in a future that might never come. And for someone whose future grew darker with each passing day, trust was a difficult thing to maintain. One evening, as they sat together in the back room of her shop with Marigold purring between them and snow falling softly outside the window, Grace finally voiced the fear that had been growing in her heart. "What happens when I cannot see at all anymore?" she asked quietly, watching the blurred orange glow of the lamp flame. "When I cannot work or care for myself? When I become nothing but a burden?" Ryder was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than immediately reassuring. "First, you're going to tell me to mind my own business and that you can take care of yourself. Then you're going to be angry and scared and probably push me away because you think that's what's best for me. And then, if I'm lucky and stubborn enough, you're going to realize that I'm not going anywhere and we'll figure out how to move forward together." Despite herself, Grace felt a smile tug at her lips. "You have it all planned out." "I've given it some thought," Ryder admitted. "Grace, I won't lie to you and say that things won't change if your vision gets worse. They will. Life will be different and challenging in ways neither of us can fully predict. But different doesn't mean worse. Different doesn't mean you're a burden. It just means we adapt." "How can you be so calm about this?" Grace asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "How can you tie yourself to a woman who might be blind within a year? You're young and strong and kind. You could have any woman you wanted." "But I want you," Ryder said simply, and she felt him take her hand. "Grace, my father was killed at Gettysburg when I was 5 years old. My mother raised 4 children alone, taking in sewing and laundry and working herself to the bone to keep us fed. When I was 12, she got sick, some kind of wasting disease that the doctors couldn't treat. She got weaker and weaker until she couldn't work at all, could barely get out of bed. Do you know what happened?" Grace shook her head, her throat tight. "Our community came together," Ryder continued. "Neighbors brought food. The church helped with rent. Other seamstresses took in work and brought my mother a portion of the profits, claiming she had helped train them and deserved compensation. People didn't abandon her because she couldn't be productive anymore. They supported her because they cared about her as a person, not as a worker. She lived 3 more years, long enough to see my oldest sister married and my brother apprenticed to a carpenter. And those years were hard, but they were also full of love and laughter and people showing up in ways that mattered." "That's a beautiful story," Grace said softly. "But I don't have a community like that. I barely have any family left in Aspen." "You have me," Ryder said. "And I promise you, Grace, whatever comes, I will be here. Not out of obligation or pity, but because I love you." The words hung in the air between them, and Grace felt her heart stop and then start again at double speed. "What did you say?" "I love you," Ryder repeated, squeezing her hand. "I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you scrunch up your nose when you're concentrating. I love how you talk to Marigold like she's a person, and how you know every story behind every pattern you weave. I love you, Grace Garrison, and I want to spend my life with you, whatever that life looks like." Grace felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were not tears of frustration or fear. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been trying so hard not to, trying to protect us both, but I love you, Ryder, so much it scares me." She felt rather than saw him move closer, and then his hands were cradling her face, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his breath warm against her skin. "Yes," Grace breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and sweet and full of promise. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, tender and thrilling, and when they finally pulled apart, Grace was trembling and breathless and happier than she could remember being in years. "Marry me," Ryder said, his forehead resting against hers. "I know it's fast. I know we've only been courting for a couple months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me, Grace. Let me take care of you and let you take care of me, and let's build a life together." Grace knew she should think about it, should be practical and consider all the reasons why this might not work. But her heart had already decided, and for once she let herself listen to it instead of her fears. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried a bouquet of dried flowers since fresh ones were scarce in the December cold. Ryder wore his Sunday best and could not stop smiling, and the small gathering of ranch hands and townspeople who attended agreed. It was one of the happiest weddings they had ever witnessed. The ranch foreman, a grizzled man named Jack who had taken a liking to Ryder, offered them the use of a small cabin on the ranch property, one that had stood empty since the previous tenant had moved on to work in the silver mines. It was modest but sturdy, with 2 rooms and a good fireplace, and it was theirs to use as long as Ryder worked for the ranch. Grace closed her shop, selling the building to a young couple who wanted to start a dry goods store, and moved her loom and supplies to the cabin. She continued to weave, though now at her own pace and only when her eyes allowed it. True to his word, Ryder bought every piece she made, though he had started gifting many of them to people around the ranch and in town, spreading her beautiful work far and wide. Their first months of marriage were an adjustment, as all new marriages are, but they were also filled with a deep contentment that neither had expected. Ryder proved to be a patient and caring husband, helping Grace learn the layout of their new home and never making her feel inadequate when she struggled with tasks that had once been simple. Grace, in turn, worked to accept help with grace rather than resentment, and slowly learned to define herself by more than her ability to work. In February, Ryder used his saved wages to take Grace to Denver to see the physician he had mentioned months ago. The doctor, an elderly man with gentle hands and impressive credentials from medical schools back east, examined Grace thoroughly and confirmed what the local doctor had said. The fever had damaged the nerves in her eyes, and the deterioration would likely continue. But he also offered something the local doctor had not: hope. The progression might slow on its own, he explained. Sometimes these things plateau after the initial damage is done. And there are exercises you can do to strengthen the remaining vision you have, ways of training your eyes to make the most of what's left. I won't lie to you and say you'll regain what you've lost, but you might not lose everything either. He taught Grace exercises to do daily, ways of focusing and relaxing her eyes to reduce strain. He prescribed tinted glasses that cut down on the harsh glare that had been contributing to her headaches. And he told her to rest her eyes regularly, to not push herself to the point of pain, and to accept that some days would be better than others. On the train ride back to Aspen, Grace leaned against Ryder's shoulder and felt a weight lift from her chest that she had been carrying for over a year. She might never see perfectly again, but she was not without resources or hope. And more importantly, she was not alone. Spring came to the Colorado mountains with a rush of wildflowers and newborn calves, and Grace found that the doctor had been right. Her vision seemed to stabilize, no longer deteriorating at the rapid pace it had been. She still could not see fine details and had to squint to make out faces at a distance, but on good days with proper light and her tinted glasses, she could weave for several hours without pain. She created some of her finest work that spring, intricate patterns inspired by the landscape around their cabin and the love that filled their home. Ryder continued to purchase every piece, and his pride in displaying her work brought her joy she had not known she needed. One warm afternoon in May, Grace was sitting outside their cabin with her weaving in her lap, enjoying the sunshine and the sound of birds in the nearby trees, when Ryder came riding up the path from the main ranch at a gallop. He dismounted quickly and swept her into his arms before she could even ask what was wrong. "Jack is retiring," he said, breathless with excitement. "The owner asked me to take over as foreman. It comes with a salary increase and the offer to purchase this cabin and the 5 acres around it at a fair price. Grace, we could own our own land." Grace felt her heart swell with happiness for him. Ryder had worked so hard, rising before dawn and returning after sunset, earning the respect of the other ranch hands and the owner through his dedication and skill. "That's wonderful," she said, cupping his face in her hands. "You deserve this, Ryder." "We deserve it," he corrected, kissing her soundly. "You and me together. What do you say? Should we put down roots here permanently?" Grace looked around at the cabin that had become their home, at the mountains rising in the distance and the meadow full of flowers stretching toward the creek. She thought about the life they were building together, about the love that grew stronger with each passing day, about the future that no longer seemed quite so frightening with Ryder by her side. "Yes," she said, smiling up at her husband. "Let's build our life here." They purchased the cabin and land, signing papers in town that made Grace's hands shake with the enormity of it. She owned property. She had a home that no one could take from her. After years of uncertainty and fear, she had stability and security. But more than that, she had love. As summer arrived and Grace's 25th birthday approached, she discovered she had another blessing to count. She had missed her monthly courses twice and had been feeling queasy in the mornings, and though she hesitated to hope, she recognized the signs from watching other women in town. When she finally gathered the courage to tell Ryder, choosing a quiet evening when they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold, he whooped with joy and picked her up and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing and begging him to put her down. "We're having a baby," he kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "Grace, we're going to be parents." "Are you ready for this?" Grace asked, suddenly nervous. "Ryder, what if I cannot care for a baby properly? What if my eyes get worse and I cannot see our child?" Ryder knelt in front of her chair and took both her hands in his. "Then you'll love them with all your heart, and you'll care for them in all the ways that matter, and I'll be there to help with the things that are hard. Grace, you're going to be an incredible mother. Our child will be so lucky to have you." Grace leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into that kiss. "I'm so glad I said yes when you asked to court me," she whispered against his lips. "Best decision you ever made," Ryder agreed with a grin, and Grace could not argue with that. The pregnancy was not easy. Grace struggled with nausea and exhaustion, and her vision seemed to worsen slightly under the strain her body was experiencing. But Ryder was there through all of it, holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings and reading to her for hours when she was too tired to do anything but rest. The women from the ranch families in town rallied around her as well, bringing casseroles and baby clothes and advice that was sometimes helpful and sometimes overwhelming. Grace found herself part of a community in a way she had not been since before her mother died, and the isolation she had felt for so long began to fade. In early February, on a cold night with snow falling heavily outside, Grace went into labor. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered half the babies in Aspen, arrived and took charge with calm efficiency. Ryder stayed by Grace's side through the long hours of labor, holding her hand and whispering encouragement even when she threatened to murder him for putting her through this. When their son finally arrived just after dawn, wailing lustily and perfect in every way, Grace held him to her chest and wept with joy. She could not see his features clearly, could not tell if he had her eyes or Ryder's nose, but she could feel his warmth and hear his cries and smell his sweet baby scent, and that was enough. "He's beautiful," Ryder said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Grace, he's absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Ryder's father who had died when Ryder was young, and called him Tommy. Grace took to motherhood with a fierceness that surprised her, learning to care for her son despite her limited vision by relying on her other senses and on the mother's instinct that seemed to guide her hands. She nursed him and changed him and soothed him when he cried, and Ryder helped with everything else, changing nappies at 2 in the morning and walking the floor with a fussy baby so Grace could rest. As Tommy grew from an infant into a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone and everything, Grace found her fears about being unable to care for him largely unfounded. Yes, there were challenges, moments when she could not tell if his clothes were stained or if she had cleaned his face properly. But Ryder was there to help, and more importantly, Tommy did not care if his mother could not see him perfectly. He cared that she held him and fed him and sang to him, that she responded when he cried and played with him when he was content. Grace's vision stabilized again after Tommy's birth, and she returned to her weaving with renewed passion. She created blankets for her son, trying to capture in thread and color all the love she felt for him. She made pieces to sell, supplementing Ryder's income and saving money for their growing family's future. And she found that her work had improved in some ways, that her inability to see fine details had forced her to focus on bold patterns and striking color combinations that people loved. When Tommy was 8 months old and pulling himself up on furniture, clearly preparing to walk soon, Grace realized she was pregnant again. This time the news brought excitement rather than fear, confidence built from successfully navigating motherhood once already. Their daughter arrived in early spring, smaller than Tommy had been but equally healthy and vocal. They named her Ruth, after Grace's mother, and she had a cap of dark hair and her father's stubborn chin. Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister, toddling over to pat her gently and offering her his favorite toys, which she was far too young to appreciate. Life settled into a busy but joyful rhythm. Ryder continued to excel as foreman, earning respect and good wages that allowed them to expand their cabin, adding a proper bedroom for the children and a larger space for Grace's loom. Grace wove when she could between caring for 2 young children, and Ryder still bought every piece she made, though now he often had to clear space in their home to store them all. "You know you don't have to keep buying everything I make," Grace told him one evening as she watched him try to find room for yet another blanket. "I can sell to other people now. We have enough money saved." "I know," Ryder said, turning to smile at her. "But I like knowing that your beautiful work stays close to us. Besides, We'll need these for all the children we're going to have." "All the children," Grace laughed. "How many are you planning on?" "At least 6, Ryder said cheerfully, ducking the pillow she threw at his head. "Or however many you'll give me. I came from a big family, and I want the same for our kids." Grace rolled her eyes but could not quite hide her smile. "Let me survive these 2 first, and then we'll talk about more." But she had to admit, as she watched Ryder wrestle gently with Tommy while Ruth dozed in her cradle nearby, that she loved their growing family. She loved the noise and chaos and endless work of caring for children. She loved seeing Ryder as a father, patient and playful and endlessly devoted. And she loved knowing that despite everything she had been through, despite her failing vision and her fears about the future, she had built something beautiful and lasting. The years passed with the swift inexorability of childhood. Tommy and Ruth were joined by another son, James, and then twin daughters, Lily and Rose. Grace's vision fluctuated, sometimes better and sometimes worse, but it never failed completely as she had once feared. She learned to navigate her life with limited sight, using tricks and tools and the help of her growing children, who learned early to describe things for their mother in vivid detail. Ryder kept his promise from their early days together. He never treated Grace as a burden or as anything less than his equal partner in building their life. He bought every piece she wove, filling their home and the homes of friends and family with her beautiful work. And when Grace finally told him, surrounded by their 5 children and sitting in their expanded cabin that was full of love and laughter, that she was content to stop weaving professionally and focus on her family, he simply kissed her and said he would support whatever decision she made. "You've created more beauty in this world than most people ever do," he told her. "Through your weaving, yes, but more importantly through our children and through the life we've built together. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, Grace." Grace looked around at her family, at the children playing and arguing and laughing together, at the husband who had loved her through every challenge and celebrated every triumph, and she knew he was right. She had proved everything she needed to prove, to herself most of all. She still wove sometimes, creating special pieces for birthdays and holidays, teaching her daughters the patterns her mother had taught her. But mostly she focused on living, on experiencing the richness of a life she had once thought would be defined by loss. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder surprised Grace with a trip back to Denver, arranging for his mother, who had moved to Colorado to be near them, to watch the children. They stayed in a nice hotel and ate in fancy restaurants, and walked through the city streets with Grace's arm tucked through Ryder's, describing everything to her in detail. On their last evening, as they sat in their hotel room watching the lights of the city below, Ryder pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you," he said, placing it in her hands. Grace unwrapped it carefully and found a thick book, the cover embossed with letters she had to trace with her fingers to make out. "What is it?" "It's a journal," Ryder explained. "I've been writing in it for the past 10 years, keeping a record of our life together. Everything from the first day I walked into your shop to Tommy's first steps to the twins' birth. I thought maybe someday, when the children are grown, we could read through it together and remember all these years." Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks as she held the precious book. "You've been writing our story, our love story," Ryder corrected. "The greatest adventure of my life." Grace set the book aside carefully and pulled her husband close, kissing him with all the passion and love and gratitude that filled her heart. "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I tried to push you away." "Loving you was the easiest thing I've ever done," Ryder said simply. "Even when you were stubborn and difficult and convinced you were a burden, especially then, actually. Grace laughed and cried and held him close, thinking about how far she had come from that frightened woman squinting at threads in her shop. She had lost much of her vision, but she had gained so much more. A husband who loved her unconditionally, children who filled her days with joy, a home and a life that was richer than anything she had imagined in those dark days when her future seemed so uncertain. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. The children grew and developed their own personalities and dreams. Tommy proved to be brilliant with numbers and talked about becoming an accountant. Ruth had her mother's talent for textiles and her father's head for business, already planning to start her own shop someday. James was quiet and thoughtful, happiest when working with the horses on the ranch. The twins were identical in appearance but opposite in temperament, with Lily bold and outgoing while Rose was shy and artistic. Ryder eventually bought the entire ranch when the owner retired, transforming from foreman to owner and proving to be a fair and successful businessman. Grace continued to weave occasionally, now teaching classes to women in town who wanted to learn the craft. Her vision had plateaued at a level that was challenging but manageable, allowing her to maintain her independence while accepting help when she needed it. When Tommy turned 18 and prepared to leave for college in Denver, studying business and accounting as he had always planned, Grace stood with Ryder on the porch of their home and watched their firstborn ride away toward his future. She felt bittersweet about his departure, proud of the man he had become but already missing his presence in their daily life. "We did well with him," Ryder said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "We did," Grace agreed. "With all of them." "Do you ever regret it?" Ryder asked quietly. "Marrying me, taking on a family when your sight was failing. Do you ever wish you had made different choices?" Grace turned to face her husband, reaching up to touch his face, tracing the lines that time and sun and laughter had etched there. She could not see him clearly, might never have been able to see him with perfect clarity even in the early days of their courtship, but she knew every inch of him by heart. "Never," she said firmly. "You gave me everything, Ryder. A home and a family and a life full of love. You saw past my failing eyes to the person I was inside. How could I ever regret that?" "I'm the one who got the better deal," Ryder said, kissing her forehead. "A beautiful wife who made my life worth living." They stood together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors Grace could no longer see clearly, but could feel in the warmth on her face and hear in Ryder's descriptions. Behind them, their home was full of the sounds of their remaining children, and before them stretched whatever years they had left together. As the seasons turned and the children continued to grow and eventually leave home one by one, pursuing their own dreams and building their own lives, Grace and Ryder grew older together with a contentment that many people never achieve. They celebrated 20 years of marriage, then 25, then 30, marking each anniversary with quiet joy and gratitude for every day they had been given. Grace's vision remained stable, never disappearing completely despite her early fears. She could still distinguish light from dark, could make out shapes and colors if they were bold enough, could navigate her home, and the ranch with confidence built from decades of familiarity. She had long since stopped defining herself by what she could not do and instead focused on what she could. And the list of things she was capable of was long and impressive. When their youngest children, the twins, married in a double ceremony at the ranch, Grace stood beside Ryder and felt the same overwhelming love she had experienced at all the major milestones of their children's lives. Lily married a banker from Denver, planning to move to the city and pursue her dreams of a cosmopolitan life. Rose married a local artist, settling in a cabin near Grace and Ryder's home where she could be close to the family she adored. And when the grandchildren started arriving, Grace discovered a whole new dimension to love. She held her grandchildren with the same fierce tenderness she had held her own babies, teaching them songs and stories, creating special woven blankets for each one, and reveling in the continuation of the family she and Ryder had built together. On their 35th wedding anniversary, Ryder gave Grace another gift. They stood in what had once been her weaving shop in town, now a successful dry goods store run by the couple who had bought it decades ago, and Ryder presented her with a large framed piece. Grace squinted at it, trying to make out details, and then gasped as she realized what it was. It was a collection of photographs, carefully arranged and annotated, showing various pieces she had woven over the years. Each photo was labeled with details about when she had made it, who had purchased it, and where it had ended up. "I've been collecting these for years," Ryder explained, "tracking down your pieces all over Colorado and beyond. You once worried that your work would be forgotten, that your failing vision meant you would leave no mark on the world. I wanted you to see how wrong you were." Grace traced the frame with trembling fingers, seeing proof of a lifetime of creation and beauty spread before her. Her work had traveled far and wide, touching lives she would never know about, bringing warmth and color to homes across the territory. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing close to her husband. "Thank you for believing in me when I could not believe in myself." "Always," Ryder promised, and it was a promise he had kept every day since the first time he walked into her shop and saw not a woman losing her sight, but a woman worth knowing and loving and spending a lifetime with. As Grace approached her 60th birthday, she reflected on the unexpected journey her life had taken. She had started as a frightened young woman facing the loss of her livelihood and her independence, convinced that her failing vision meant the end of any hope for happiness. Instead, she had found a love that sustained her through every challenge, built a family that was her greatest achievement, and created a life that was rich and full and meaningful beyond anything she could have imagined. Her vision had never been restored, but in some ways she saw more clearly than she ever had with perfect eyes. She saw what truly mattered: love and family, connection and community, the strength to accept help and the grace to offer it. She saw that disability did not mean inability, that losing one sense could heighten others, and that worth was not determined by what you could produce, but by who you were. And she saw, with absolute clarity, that Ryder Thompson walking into her shop all those years ago had been the greatest blessing of her life. On a warm summer evening, as Grace sat on the porch of their home surrounded by children and grandchildren gathered for a family celebration, she felt Ryder take her hand and squeeze it gently. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, and she heard the smile in his voice. "How lucky I am," Grace said simply. "How different my life could have been if you hadn't decided to buy every piece I made so I could rest." "Best investment I ever made," Ryder said, and he meant it. "I got you." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of her family around her and feeling the warmth of the setting sun on her face. Her vision might be limited, but her life was anything but. It was full and complete and exactly what it was supposed to be. She had learned that rest was not the same as giving up, that accepting help was not weakness, and that love could transform what seemed like loss into unexpected gain. She had learned that the measure of a life well lived was not in what you could see, but in what you could feel and give and create. And most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when we're at our lowest point, when we think we have nothing left to offer, and someone comes along who sees our worth and refuses to let us give up on ourselves. Grace Garrison Thompson had lost much of her eyesight, but she had gained everything that mattered. And in the end, surrounded by love and family and a lifetime of beautiful memories, that was more than enough. It was everything.